Have you ever seen an old concrete hatch locked up with chains and heavy padlocks and wondered what's inside? That's what I always wondered about this one, located just down the road from where I live. But what if I told you it's actually one of hundreds of abandoned Cold War nuclear bunkers hidden around the United Kingdom? Well, one day curiosity got the better of me and I climbed inside to see what was left of it. Lovely. This must have been a hand pump. Could have been used for pumping the water that is now currently flooding the station. In there, you may recognise the toilet lid. That is a, what's that called? Full-Tex chemical toilet. I wonder if that still works. Right. Let me just, pull up a disgusting chair. I have always wanted to know what the inside of one of these things look like, mainly because they are everywhere. In the UK, there are well over 1,000 of these bunkers hidden all over the United Kingdom, and all hidden in plain sight. Some of them in terrible condition like this, but some of them almost untouched from the day that they were abandoned. This is the post. Oh my goodness, this is in immaculate condition. The most amazing thing is, these were intended to be used by the British government in the event of a nuclear war, but not perhaps in the way that you might think. They weren't intended for survival, and they certainly weren't even really intended for much long-term use. Instead, they were a fascinating analogue network of nuclear reporting stations that could tell the British government, or the authorities in control at the time, whoever that may be, hidden away in their bunkers, what the nuclear blasts looked like, where they were, what kind of fallout was expected in certain areas of the United Kingdom. And each of these posts was manned by volunteers who would be reporting this up until the moment they had to leave the station and wander out into the now apocalyptic landscape. So what is the story of Britain's bizarre nuclear posts? How did they work? And is there any in better condition than this? This is the story of Britain's nuclear observation posts. Being down here is quite remarkable. You do feel, I suppose, that you could weather the initial blast, perhaps, of a nuclear exchange, but there is one thing that this bunker can't protect you from, and that is spam. As I was down here recording this intro, I literally got a spam call and about 5 different emails to my inbox, but thankfully, today's sponsor can help. I do honestly believe that one of the biggest scandals of the next coming decades is going to be the growing realization of just how much of our personal data is being stolen, bought and sold on the open market. But today's sponsor, Incogni, can at least help you take back some of that control. At every moment, hundreds, thousands of companies all over the world are harvesting your personal data, your phone number, your address, your IP address, your browsing history, everything. But more than that, they're storing it and selling it to any company or person who's willing to pay for it. It contributes to spam in your inboxes, robocalls, texts, the rising threat of identity theft, all fueled by an industry built on buying and selling your personal information. Now, we as individuals have the right to demand that data brokers remove and delete our personal information that they have collected and stored. But where do you start? What companies do you contact? And if you manage to find out who they were, what do you even say to them? Well, that's where Incogni comes in. Incogni reaches out to data brokers. They request that your personal information is removed, and they deal with any objections that those companies may have. You simply create an account, allow Incogni to work on your behalf, and then you simply sit back and let the magic happen. It's funny, since I signed up, I've been getting a lot of emails, but the emails are all from these data broker companies emailing me to tell me that my data has now been removed from their records. So take your personal data back with Incogni and use code CALUM to get 60% off your annual plan. Now, let's get back under the ground and into Britain's strange nuclear bunkers. The end of the Second World War was marked with the use of a new and terrifying form of weapon, the atomic bomb. Fat Man and Little Boy remain to this day the only nuclear weapons used in an armed conflict, and dropped days apart from each other upon the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. With their use, a strange and terrifying new age had begun, but the horrifying power of these atomic bombs would soon be usurped by an even larger doomsday weapon, the thermonuclear hydrogen bomb. From the kiloton atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima, equivalent to some 20,000 tons of TNT, by the 1950s, hydrogen nuclear bombs being tested by the United States, the Soviet Union and Britain now easily boasted equivalent yields of over 1 million tons of TNT. These weapons were not only powerful in their sheer destructive force, but the vast amounts of radioactive materials that they would also expel. To the British government, the reality of the situation was pretty stark. Projections and war games had shown that in the event of a limited or full-on nuclear exchange, millions would die, and the resulting destruction of infrastructure, the refugees, the starvation, the casualties would overwhelm any governmental response. So what the government realised they needed was a network, a system, an organisation that could pre-warn of an impending nuclear attack, determine exactly where the impact sites were, but then also track the weather conditions, fallout levels, individual fallout levels in and around the country. Now, this organisation, formed in 1955, was to be known as the United Kingdom Warning and Monitoring Organisation, or the UKWMO. Now, while the British Isles were comparatively small, which is of course what made the potential of a nuclear attack so unbelievably catastrophic, it was also so large that it would require hundreds, if not thousands, of monitoring posts all around the country, whether that be Scotland, England, Northern Ireland or Wales, to report and disseminate this information that the UKWMO needed. Now, the UKWMO didn't really have the organisation or the personnel to do all of that. So what they did is they turned to an organisation that was perfectly suited for the task, the Royal Observer Corps. The Royal Observer Corps could trace their roots back to the First World War, where early defence networks and volunteer spotters were employed around London to warn against attacks by German Zeppelin raids and early long-range bombers. By the beginning of the Second World War, the Observation Corps had expanded to a large network of trained volunteers located all across the United Kingdom, and using simple observation posts located anywhere from rural fields to factory rooftops, and equipped to determine and report the position of aircraft to Central Command via telephone lines or radio.
Okay, coming in from southeast. Right. Exit. There's our hostile bombers.
In recognition of the valuable services of the Observer Corps, His Majesty has approved that in future it be known as the Royal Observer Corps. After years of devoted and arduous service, the announcement by the Secretary of Air brings the Corps out of obscurity into the limelight it so nobly deserves. ROC. They're grand fellas.
Later in the war, as German V-2 rocket strikes began terrorising towns and cities with unpredictable and indiscriminate attacks, what was now the Royal Observer Corps would increasingly be used to report and confirm many of the impact points of these new German missiles, which moved far too fast to effectively identify and track. With the beginning of the Cold War, the Royal Observer Corps, or ROC as they were known, would evolve once again, with the volunteers and observation posts forming the keystone of how the British government would be able to observe and report where nuclear weapons had hit and where deadly radiation might be spreading in the event of a nuclear exchange. However, the simple above-ground observation posts and headquarters that the ROC had traditionally operated would be useless in the event of a nuclear war. What was needed were stations that could house and protect teams around the country for the hours, days and weeks after a nuclear exchange, allowing them to feed back to the larger UKWMO bases with up-to-date weather information, radiation readings and other general observations. After decades of watching the skies, the ROC was now moving underground. Soon, a massive campaign was undertaken to build the hundreds of underground posts required for the ROC in their new role. Now, they intended to build around 250 of these per year starting in 1957, and they ended up with, I believe according to Subterranea Britannica, 1,563 of these posts spread all across the United Kingdom, and generally speaking, almost all completely identical. There was small differences depending on the contractor and the landscape conditions, but generally speaking, they all followed a very similar plan. And you can actually see a cross-section here of what one would have looked like. Now, this dates from 1964, and this is a GPO plan. So this was a plan for the contractors who were putting in the telephone cables for the communication systems. But you can get a good idea of what one of these would have looked like in its kind of most base form, I suppose. Now, you can see in photos of the time what they did. They essentially excavated a massive hole out of the ground, shuttered concrete walls, and what they ended up creating was a 19-foot long by about 8 foot 6 inches wide box under the ground, and it was buried under around 3 feet of soil. Now, it gave you about 7 foot 6 inches of standing room on the interior. Now, the walls were quite thick. It was 6-inch thick walls with a 7.5-inch thick roof on the top, and most of it was dedicated to that main room, the monitoring room, as you can see here. There was, I suppose, 2 other rooms that you can see, and if we go to this other page, you can get a better idea of it here. Here's a plan looking down, so 19 foot long by 8 foot 6 inches wide. You've got the main room, or the monitoring room as it was known. You've got the access shaft with a ladder. Actually, underneath that, as you can see here, there's a small drain as well too, and there was usually a pump in here so they could pump any water out of it, because obviously under the groundwater, these things were very susceptible to leaking. Some of these were actually waterproofed. A lot of them weren't and have today flooded, but some of them got an extra protective layer of asphalt basically around them, or it was more like tar, bitumen, something like that. But if we look back here, you can also see the closet here. Now, it's called a closet in this diagram. It was also known as the chemical closet because it had a chemical toilet in it. And of course, you might have noticed I found an original chemical toilet in that old ROC post that I explored at the start of the video. Now, I think the most complete and brilliantly detailed history of the Royal Observer Corps comes from Attack Warning Red. It was written by Derek Wood. It has every detail you could ever possibly imagine or want to know about the Royal Observer Corps, all the way back to those beginnings in World War I. Remember, they weren't officially formed until 1925, but the sort of precursor to the Observer Corps started in World War I, formed in 1925. They then came into their own during the Second World War. They were then stood down, and then they were brought back into service for the Cold War, where they turned into their kind of nuclear role. Now, in this book, they have just this beautiful illustration showing both the above ground and the below ground. Now, on the above ground, you can actually see not much is visible, and of course that was, I suppose, partially the point, but nowadays, of course, that's what makes these things so easy to miss as well too. The main thing that you'd spot is the access hatch here on the top. It really interesting levered system on these hatches. I've seen some old diagrams of how they work, but they're very clever, and to this day, all these years later, they still work incredibly well. Now, as we move down the ladder, you can see the main monitoring room. You can also see, of course, the chemical closet, as it was known. It doesn't matter if it is, observation posts in Gibraltar or rescue buoys in World War II. It always comes down to toilets. People always want to know, what are you going to use in the event that you need to go to the toilet? And these guys were provided with chemical toilets. I would not like to imagine how difficult it would be carrying a full toilet up one of these access shafts. But I guess if you're having to use that toilet in the event of a nuclear war, you've got bigger things to worry about. In the main monitoring room here, you can see the equipment, the tables, the storage cupboards, and you can also see the bunks there as well too. You would have had, again, the provisions to maintain your team of up to 4 people for around a week under the ground there. Wouldn't have been a very comfortable week. It wouldn't even be, imagine, a very comfortable 24 hours with 4 people under the ground there. But that was the very basic, very kind of sparse beginnings of what these monitoring posts looked like. And, looking at old blueprints, looking at books and illustrations from the time, it's all fascinating. But when you're in one of those old posts, you're probably thinking, I wonder what it would have looked like in its heyday. I wonder if there's a way I could go back in time and actually see what one of these things looked like complete. Well, you can. On the west coast of Scotland, on a quiet hillside above the village of Skelmorlie, sits an original ROC monitoring post, now lovingly restored by volunteers and former members of the 25-group Royal Observer Corps who once operated it. Skelmorlie is now one of the few remaining bunkers preserved in its original condition, and the small museum has collected numerous pieces of original equipment to show what an operating post would have once looked like. So there's the world up above me. You can see the weight there that would have been used for holding down the hatch on this side. You got the ladder coming down, and then as we actually come down into the post itself, behind me over here is the actual post proper that we'll have a look at. First thing though, in here, There's your toilet. There was a separate room used as a toilet. No running water or anything like that. Remember, no plumbing or anything. All that you had in here was a bucket with a lid and a few chemicals that you could pour into it. But then as we come inside, just this, you can see this is the entire room proper. You know, what I will say is, first reactions, it's like an Airbnb. It's actually surprisingly spacious. It's tall above you. I can just about touch the ceiling up here, and I'm about 5'10". You've got your 2 bunks here at the end. Remember, a post would have had 3 people in it, so you would have had 1 resting, 1 sleeping, and 1 working. And then under here, you can see these are the water canisters. These wouldn't have been kept filled. They would have been kept empty, and they would have been filled when they thought there was a need to actually come down here and man one of the posts, essentially. So what you have here, strip light, and then you have a small 12-volt light. That's the only source of light there would have been, or one of these. So there would have been 1 strip light like this, and there would have been 1 small bulb light, and that's it. It would have been a pretty dark and gloomy place, because everything, like I say, was being run off a battery. So you would have had 2 very dim lights, enough basically to do your writing and your note-taking. And that was about it, really. So yeah, quite remarkable. While equipment and technology in the monitoring posts would change over the decades, the 2 main pieces of equipment, one used to determine the ground zero or impact point of a nearby nuclear burst, and the other to determine its power, remained almost completely unchanged. These were the ground zero indicator, or GZI, and the bomb power indicator, or BPI. The ground zero indicator functioned like a simple pinhole camera. A cylindrical can contained 4 sheets of photographic paper, printed with a grid, with each pinhole facing one of the sheets and aligned with the 4 points of a compass. It would be installed when needed on a fixed plate on the concrete entrance hatch, and the intense light from a nearby nuclear blast would expose upon the sheets of paper. From the photo paper, the bearing and elevation of these could then be recorded. This, combined with the triangulated readings from other nearby posts, could give a highly accurate determination of where a blast had occurred.
It is. It's on the east one. That gives us the bearing as 104 at an elevation of 01. Spot size 12. Quite a big one. And touching the horizon line.
Tocsin, Papa 1.
Tocsin, Papa 1.
1450, pressure 2.5.
The bomb power indicator, one of the most recognisable elements to any post's monitoring room, was a similarly simple but effective piece of equipment used to determine the power of a nearby nuclear blast. A small pipe emanating from the ground above fed down into the monitoring room and into the scale. In the event of a nuclear strike, the pressure of the blast wave over the bunker would feed down this scale and give a reading of the strength of the blast. To determine local radiation levels, posts would also be equipped with a fixed survey meter and a radiac survey meter. Radiac survey meters required readings to be taken outside, whereas the fixed survey meter could be fed up through another pipe located in the roof of the monitoring room, allowing the crew inside to gather radiation readings from the safety of the bunker. For communications, each post was connected to the telephone grid, originally with World War II era head and breast sets, before eventually evolving into more modern teletalk systems and later radio communications. Posts also carried equipment for warning the public of a pending attack or approaching fallout, including hand-cranked sirens and later a visual flare system.
Fallout warning, Canterbury 1, Canterbury 2, Canterbury 3, black.
To coordinate this vast network of posts, the country was divided into 5 sectors, and within them 25 subsectors or groups. Within each group were dozens of individual monitoring posts. 3 to 4 monitoring posts worked together as part of what was known as a cluster, with one master post that would receive weather reports, fallout readings and locations of strikes from other posts in the cluster and feed those back to the respective group headquarters, which were larger and far more substantial bunkers where the information could be collected and analysed by teams of Royal Observer Corps volunteers, UKWMO staff, as well as scientists and other specialists on hand. From there, the UKWMO would use this information to inform police or armed forces, BBC radio or TV stations, local authorities or NATO allies with up-to-date information on strikes, fallout and weather conditions. It was a vast and complex system, but also an analogue one, built and reliant on thousands of trained volunteers feeding visual observations from monitoring posts all over the country and processed by huge teams at each group headquarters in a manner similar to those found in war rooms of the Second World War. I think when you're in here and you're down here, sitting in here, seeing these surroundings and feeling the atmosphere of the place, it does put you back in time to the Cold War. It gives you this idea of you were to sit down here and potentially monitor bomb detonations in places they lived. You know, you were a volunteer from down the road. You were going to come up here and potentially measure a nuclear detonation in something that was, a few miles down the road. Really quite crazy. The majority of the observation posts and large sector headquarters had been constructed by the mid-1960s, but by only 1968, with the cash-strapped British government requiring deep cuts to defence, over 600 posts and 2 group headquarters were closed in an effort to save money. Despite these cuts, the Royal Observer Corps still remained a steadfast arm in the home defence network of the United Kingdom, especially in the 1970s, when tensions began to rise once again and more investment was made in the network's now ageing infrastructure. However, by the early 1990s, with the dissolution of the Soviet Union, the Cold War and the overarching threat of nuclear war, all but came to an end. As a result, on the 30th of September 1991, the vast organisation of volunteers and manned posts that had stood ready since the 1960s were now stood down. To many who had dedicated their lives and free time to the ROC, it was a sad and bitter end. Many were not even informed of the impending stand down, hearing it only for the first time as it was announced in Parliament in July 1991. The somewhat sudden end of the vast network of monitoring posts, the standing down of the ROC and the disbanding of the UKWMO did, however, create an unintended side effect. While the important equipment was eventually removed from each post and bunker, the years of personal additions to posts and various non-essential equipment and documents were often left behind. It created, in essence, hundreds of time capsules spread across the country, hidden from view and locked away under the ground. Over the years, various posts have been opened and explored. Countless examples have been flooded, demolished or buried over the years. Many more are left open to the elements and gradually plundered or vandalised. To this day, however, some rare examples still remain locked up and untouched from the day they were abandoned in 1991. One such example sits in the middle of the Scottish Highlands, and I was told during the production of this video that after 30 years, the locks on the surface hatches had suddenly disappeared. I thought it might be my only chance to see an original post, still as it was when it was locked up in the 1990s. Completely dry. Okay, so here we are on the interior. Got the hand pump here in good condition. The place is really dry actually. This is the bathroom, and this, wow. This is the post. Oh my God. It's in incredible condition. Oh my goodness, this is in immaculate condition. Look at this. Here's an old handmade first aid station. This is non-standards. This was clearly made by somebody. Look at this. With the little first aid package is still there. The hand-painted sign. What's this? Echo 1, 16 post, warning Inverness, District 18, loss of communications, phone Inverness 37137/8. Wow, look at this. These here, I believe, are the sheets that would be used for putting onto the flash detection. So basically, so that they could triangulate where the explosion was coming from with the other post. So I think that is the blank cartridges that would have been put into the mounting plate up top. Times come up online for sale, the plastic mug that you can see there, and then the little pots that you can see too. Those are kind of standard issue for these posts. It's amazing to see that still sitting there. So the bomb power indicator would have been located here, and then this here is an instruction manual for it. This is what it looks like. Kilopascals, General Radiological Limited, London. Empty tin there. Post office staff. Oh, wow. Okay. So this is quite unusual. I believe this is a stretcher. So this would have been used in the event that somebody needed to be taken out of the post. And I'd heard that these were in some of these posts, but I thought they'd all been removed. So I think that is an original one. I don't want to touch it because I don't want to touch anything in here. I want to leave everything as I find it. And over here, what's this? Warning, batteries. Aha, so this is the battery box. So that's your battery box. That's what the batteries would have been stored in to actually power the post itself. Empty now. Bucket that somebody's left behind, some mats. On the floor, you can see beneath me, you've got this rubberized material. This was given to a lot of the posts later on, I think for comfort more than anything else. And I believe they were actually offcuts from the British coal board. I think they were old pieces of rubber that came from basically their conveyor belts. This is quite interesting. This place was obviously battery powered, and as a result, the batteries would often run out if you left the switch on for too long. So some of the posts had this fitted, and how it worked is it was on a timer, and it would tick down. Once it ticked down, the power would turn off. What an absolute privilege to be able to have actually found one of these in relatively good condition. The chances of finding one now like this are slim to none, and in Scotland they're more likely to be incredibly damp and wet. So to be able to see this and get a chance to actually feel like what discovering one of these things would have been like, but also being in here back when these were functional is amazing. It's these little hand-done notes and drawings and things that have been left behind that I think are the most amazing thing to see. And I mean, I do worry, I don't know how long something like this is going to stay in this condition. More than likely people will find it, remove stuff from it, and it will be like the rest of them. But I'm glad I got to see it basically when I did, because who knows how many of these are really left like this. All these decades later, the allure of these nuclear monitoring posts sitting under the ground, suspended in time, has yet to fade. And I think there's several reasons for that, but one of them is the really unique role that they played within the context of nuclear war within the United Kingdom. But I think the thing that fascinates me the most about the ROC and the UKWMO and the nuclear monitoring organisation, the entire network built of clusters and monitoring posts and sector HQs and groups spread out all over the country, is just how analogue it was. All the way up until the 80s and 90s when the UKWMO was disbanded and the ROC was stood down, the way that the entire network operated was remarkably similar to how it probably would have operated during the Second World War. Remember, the two main pieces of equipment that each ROC post carried was a pinhole camera and a gauge that was basically based on the air being forced down a pipe. Most of the important systems were human observations, whether that be tidal surges, weather reports, obviously things like radiation meters as well, and the radiation meters that they were being supplied. But then once this information was then taken from the ROC post, it was being fed back to these sector HQs. And the sector HQs are remarkable. You can see in the footage how they work, but they are essentially a huge bank of volunteers, part of the ROC, who were taking this information, writing it down, passing it along to other members of the team, who were then putting these onto, large weather boards and maps to disseminate the information and figure out, where weather systems were moving, where radiation levels were spiking. It was, again, a remarkably analogue system, and I think it's something that we're never really going to see the like of again. And for that system to have survived as late as the 1990s, I think is even more remarkable. Now, remember, the sector HQs were huge. They had actual space for people to live and work underground. There was huge staffs of both ROC volunteers and employees, and also UKWMO staff, meteorologists and other weather station staff who'd be able to be on hand to disseminate the information that was coming in from the different posts. And these posts are kind of what you think of when you think of nuclear bunkers, shall we say. And remarkably, sitting in a little suburb somewhere outside of Dundee, one of these bunkers still exists. This vast complex, originally built in 1962, was once the control bunker for the Royal Observer Corps' 28 Group, one of the 31 group and sector headquarters found across the UK, and in charge of collecting and collating the data and information from the dozens of monitoring posts in their area. Now, all these decades later, it appears almost unchanged from the day it was closed. The large blast doors and decontamination chamber are almost all that's visible on the surface itself, and after passing through them, you disappear down and under the ground, where in this warren of corridors and rooms, a full ROC and UKWMO staff of up to 100 people would have lived and worked in the event of a nuclear war. In this hidden complex was everything needed to survive until a nuclear exchange had ended, and the job of monitoring the strikes and fallout was over. The large generator room would have been the bunker's lifeline in the event of a war, including powering the filtration system that would help purify the air drawn down from the surface. The post was built with its own internal water tanks, plumbing and sewage systems. Wandering the corridors, doorways lead off into dorm rooms for the men and women of the post, toilets and shower rooms, a doctor's office, as well as a sizable mess and galley. The main function of the bunker, however, would be found in the group operations room. Here, and every 5 minutes, the banks of ROC staff would receive live updates and information from the monitoring posts in the group on local radiation levels, ground zero reports and other observations. However, unlike most group headquarters, this bunker hid yet another secret. In 1976, it was further extended in order to become the UKWMO's Scotland or Caledonian sector headquarters. As a result, moving downstairs and through an unassuming corridor lies another huge operations room. Here, the UKWMO staff would receive the reports from group headquarters all across Scotland, disseminating the impact sites and the movement of fallout to local government or armed forces, who would then be able to issue fallout alerts to threatened areas or give the all clear to others. The bunker was decommissioned like the rest of the network in the 1990s, and the original surface level building was then demolished, leaving behind just a small and unassuming surface structure that hides this incredible Cold War complex. It has been under restoration since 2004, and the volunteer team have managed to restore this once empty, decommissioned maze of tunnels and rooms into a breathtaking time machine, a step back into the past and into a secret world that many to this day are still completely unaware of. For decades, these bunkers and the vast networks of trained personnel who operated them stood ready in the event of the world coming to an end, and while much of their story is now fading into the past, places like this offer a stark reminder of what could have been.
The Warning and Monitoring Organization have a precise appreciation of the fallout threat in this country. When they are satisfied that there is no further risk from fallout or other attacks, you will be advised by the...
Now remember, our main task is over, but we're still needed. We've got a lot of communications left. We're a large group of able-bodied men and women spread all over the country, and our skills are going to be invaluable. We're badly needed. Whatever's out there, it's not peace.
Quite a bleak ending there, but I thought it was an interesting one to include because it kind of illustrates the awkward point that the UKWMO and the ROC had to make in their informational films. That is from a 1971 informational educational film on the UKWMO and the ROC called Sound and Alarm. There's 3 that I used in this video, and they're fantastic, really in depth, and it takes you all the way through to, you know, tracking the nuclear detonations and the radiation levels and stuff. But then they kind of struggle slightly at the end because obviously they have, you know, done their jobs, but they have to reconcile with the fact that life as we know it, society, the entire country has been decimated or destroyed potentially by a nuclear strike. And, you know, different films deal with it in different ways. One of the films ends sort of like, well, lads, another nuclear strike's inbound, let's get back to work. Whereas Sound and Alarm ends about a week later with them staggering out and going like, right, well, you know, got to muddle on through now. But I think that's what I find so fascinating about this topic. It's, you know, how countries, how societies, how governments dealt with and approached the unapproachable nuclear war, the potential, you know, devastating strike that would eliminate and destroy the country as we know it. And I think the ROC and the UKWMO and these bunkers and the training and the organisation that went on behind the scenes to prepare and train people for that, I think is just endlessly fascinating. And I wish I could talk more, but again, you know, these videos have a tendency to run on and on. I've barely scratched the surface of this topic. I sort of felt in the making of this, I was like, gosh, I've missed it. I haven't talked about this and I haven't talked about that, but you know, it's endless. I would say if you are interested in this topic, I would go and visit the places I went to. I'll leave a link in the description below to the Dundee bunker. I forget what they actually specifically call themselves, but they host all sorts of open days and events. They use it as an event space. One of the things that I love about that Dundee bunker is it feels like you're stepping back in time because it feels like a space that's being used. You know, they sometimes even sleep down there. They use that space. They maintain the generator rooms. They're painting it and updating it and trying to keep the place running. And as a result, it feels less like a museum and more like you are stepping back in time. But I also feel like I did a bit of a disservice by saying it's like stepping back in time, because I think that takes away from the amazing amount of work they have done in restoring that place. I mean, it wasn't an empty shell. There was a lot of bits and pieces still in there, but there was nothing really. I mean, they had taken out all the equipment. They had removed everything basically of importance during the shutdown and the decommissioning process. So over the last, 2 decades now, you know, since 2004, what they have managed to bring it back to is breathtaking. I mean, if you go to my Patreon, patreon.com/CallumRassie, thanks again to all my patrons that support me, I'll do another video, I think, for there, because I've got loads of footage behind the scenes, getting a tour around there and stuff like that. But I just didn't have time to include it all, and some of it's a bit shaky. I'd love to go back again and do another video just on that place, because I find it just absolutely fascinating. The other place that's worth going to is Skelmorlie, which is a bunker, as you guys saw, restored in the interior, but something that maybe I didn't show well enough is that on the surface they actually have a big container that they have converted and turned into an observation post. So if you don't want to climb down that ladder, you can basically see what it looks like on the surface. And you know, these are the ones in Scotland. There's actually there's a few all over the country. There's one in Northern Ireland as well too, I believe. And yeah, amazing. Keeping that sort of really unique bit of Cold War history alive. I would say if you want to know about observation posts, if you want to know everything there is to know about observation posts, there is this fantastic book by Mark Dalton, who I believe restored a post down in England, and it's called The Royal Observer Corps Underground Monitoring Posts. And my goodness, it literally has everything. It goes into all the detail about all the equipment that were used in the post, the history of them, the construction plans, but then it has these amazing kind of photographs of the interiors of dozens of abandoned posts that they have uncovered over the years. And I think really it shows you, and one of the things that I love the most is, you know, there's 1,500 of these. By the end, none of them looked the same. You know, each one had been altered and updated and changed by the individuals who were kind of running that post. And I think that's one of the things that I really loved about getting into that post, and that had been almost completely untouched, that I was told about, is that, you know, you could see the personalization in there, like the little first aid kit and the handwritten signs and the like too. But anyway, big topic, covered a lot. Thanks again to my sponsors Incogni. And I mean, yeah, this has taken me a while. Fun fact, the introductory video that you saw there, I filmed in 2022, I think. So a couple of years ago, but then I realized my microphone didn't work. So 2 weeks ago, I had to go back and do the bits where I talk to camera again. So I had to go find my clothes again that I worn 2 years ago. I could have just reshot the whole thing, but I was like, well, I might as well see if I can use some of the old footage. The stuff that I filmed at Skelmorlie and in Dundee, that was also filmed, I think, in 2022 or 2023. So I'm sure if they're watching it now, thank you guys for showing me around. Sorry it's taken me this long to get the video online. But yeah, this has been like literally one of the longest productions, and that's why probably my appearance was constantly changing throughout the video as well too. But anyway, thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.